We all know that turnout generally is down in Ontario. Youth turnout is low, and turnout among new Canadians is low as well. But the bottom line is it's down for everybody. So a quick opening round to all of you. How serious is this a problem for you as politicians? And whose fault is it, and what can you do about it?
If I think about my own life, my grandmother didn't get to vote till she was 30 years old. So, you know, you wouldn't have dared not vote in our household. And I think that the issue of what are we taking for granted is one that we really have to think about. Having said that, I think sometimes people feel that voting doesn't matter, that their vote's not going to make a difference. And I can tell you, having lost my first election by 72 votes, every single vote matters.
Your column the other day where you talk about voter apathy makes losers of everyone. I bring it out because there's a photo here, and it's of somebody who's a returning officer in this room-long series of cardboard boxes. And that, to me, is exactly part of the issue. When you think about voting today, right now, it's you have to get to a voting place. You're either going to take transit or drive a car and park or get there somehow, walk. You're going to go to a building you've probably never been to before. You're going to get in a line with people you've never met before, a long line in some cases. You're going to finally get up there, bring out paper ID and register. You see where I'm going with this. The way you actually work is not reflected in the way our government system has you voting. You're not reflected in that. You work with tablets and electronic voting, and the way you work is completely different than the way our system is set up. And I'll make one more very quick point. For instance, online petitions. You will go online and think you're doing the right thing, and you've got this great group, this groundswell of online petitions. We in the legislature, we can't accept them. Our system is you must have paper and live ink on a petition or it can't be accepted. How is that inviting to you to be able to come into our place with your ideas when we can't accept them and we give you this old technology? So in one word, modernize.
For me, I get the sense that people don't feel like they can make a difference anymore. That every time they vote, they get the same old results, and they're choosing between the same old things, and they don't really see an opportunity for change to occur. And the key, I think, is to make sure that we're not just talking at them, but we're listening to them. We're engaging them in solutions and making sure that we're finding the space to do that work. And look, I mean, there's no doubt that I think everybody's talked to just a young person who said that they're not voting. But I think if we're honest about why, it's because we're not reflecting their hopes and dreams. Look, I have a son who's 25 years old, and he doesn't have a full-time job, and he's living in my basement. And I know that lots of other young people are worried about their future, worried about what's coming up for them. Are they going to be able to buy a home in the neighborhood where they grew up? Are they going to be able to afford to be able to rent, even in this city, particularly in other cities as well? What's happening to our environment? How are we going to stem, the big issues around our carbon footprint and greenhouse gas emissions? And these are the things that we need to engage young people on. Yes, it's about tuition and those kinds of things as well. It's about some of the bread and butter of getting through school, but it's also about some of the bigger picture issues. And I think we sell young people short when we don't make that attempt to pull them in. So we've tried to do that. Our party, you can vote at 14 years of age in the NDP. You can vote on policy issues. You can vote for leaders. You can do all of that, and we do that on purpose. We try to have an active youth group to not only talk about issues about when they become old enough to be leaders, but to say to them, you're leaders now. You're leaders now. We want your input, your advice, your insights now as a young person, not just at some point in the future, not just patronizing you that at some point in the future, you're going to be the leaders of tomorrow. And I think we do that too much to young people.
Well, Martin, in your column, you talked about a third of people don't vote because they think, this is, I presume from campaign research, because they don't think they're registered. And I thought a lot about that last night, thinking after I read the column, why? I'm guessing, and it's only anecdotal, that if they're not you know, a member of the NDP or the Green Party or a Liberal or a Conservative or another, if they're not a registered member of a party, perhaps that's why they don't think they have the right to vote.
That's why the voter registration in that process is important, and to get at it when kids are young.
Can I just add a wonderful example? So we had Sahir Shafiq, who is a activist with the Muslim Get Out the Vote effort, speak at our convention just a few weeks ago in Guelph. And the story of their success is incredible. In the 2011 federal election, 46% of Muslims voted. In the 2015 federal election, almost 79% voted. And it was directly due to their efforts, the community's efforts to make sure people were on the voters list, to make sure people realized how important it was to go out and vote, where to vote, if they needed help going out to vote. And so I think that's a role that Elections Ontario could potentially play in reaching out to communities of new Canadians to just let them know how to participate in the process. And then the final point I'd like to make is I think we need to strongly consider allowing permanent residents to vote in municipal elections as a way to start easing their way into the political system. I mean, they're the property taxpayers, so why aren't they allowed to vote at least in municipal elections?
So let's turn to social media. I know all of you are active on social media, and you're also targeted by social media. People tend to lose their impulse control on Twitter. They just say things they would never say. I mean, look how well behaved everyone is today when they're sitting side by side, as opposed to when they're two swords lengths apart in the legislature or when they're on the stump haranguing one another. So my first question to Ms. Wynne is, tell us about the good, the bad, and the ugly on social media and what to do about it.
It's literally a double-edged sword, because you're right, the isolation, the anonymity, I think creates a lot of vicious back and forth that I don't think helps democracy. I don't think it helps any of the political discourse. But the flip side is that social media can spread an idea, can bring people together. I mean, we saw in the 2015 federal election that people could come together at the drop of a dime because of social media. So there's a democratizing effect that social media can have. My question, I go back to the question I asked before, how should we be using it? Because I didn't grow up with the social media that we have. With all due respect, nobody on this platform grew up with the technology that is available today, and so I really think we need to ask young people, how can we best use social media to engage you to engage us? What are the solutions there? I literally do not have them. We have teams of young people who are working on our team, in our party, but I really think it's going to be an important question that young people are going to have to work with us on. We can't assume that we're going to get the answers. And then the final thing I would say is that with all of that, with all of social media, there is nothing that takes the place of human interaction. And so whenever I hear in our campaign teams this notion that somehow we are going to substitute personal interaction with social media, I think it's additive. I think that it's in addition to the personal interaction, because that's where the real exchange happens. So I think that it is a tool, but it's not the answer to any of the questions that you've asked.
You've all been so incredibly engaged and engaging today. Let me ask you a bit of a trick question. Why can't you be like this all the time? Why can't you? No, it's actually a serious question, or a half-serious question. People say, this is a cliche, that people are turned off by negativity, by negative advertising, by name-calling, by criminalizing, and so on. So is it partly your fault, collectively, I'm not going to pick on anybody here, that maybe there's a different way to prosecute the issues instead of prosecuting each other? Ms. Horvath.
Your fault, Martin.
It's an interesting.
Your fault.
It's an interesting point, Martin. But I think people become more cynical about politics when they see that people make promises and parties make promises and then they get elected and those promises don't get fulfilled, and then folks say, well, so why do I even bother to vote if the promises that are being made that I voted for are not going to get implemented? And that's what creates great disappointment, and that's what creates great cynicism. And so then you really can't blame people for saying, why should I bother? And I don't know about you, but there's also people who, we'll hear it all the time. I mean, I certainly hear it all the time, is all politicians are the same. They don't think that their vote is going to make a difference. And so what I believe, and I'm going to go back to what I said at the beginning, I believe we have to give people something to vote for, something to get excited about.
And I'm going to make a hockey analogy, which my team will be very happy with. So I grew up in the era of 6 teams, and I can remember when the Philadelphia Flyers started to put a goon on the ice and fight. And the fighting is what has become, or did become, certainly for years, I think we might be going in the other direction now in hockey, but the light was shone on the fight and people waited for the fight to happen. And I think there's an element of that in what's happened in political culture, is that people are waiting for the fight. The media, with all due respect, likes the fight, is not necessarily interested in the good news, because Andrea talks about promises broken, but who writes about the promises that were kept? Who writes about the hundreds of policy initiatives that governments deliver on? It's not news, right? And so I think that culture of getting your blood up and getting your fists up, that is something, again,
that's the hockey analogy.
We all have to take responsibility for.
First of all, I'm going to accept blame. Thank you for finally someone took a shot at the media, and deservedly so, because I do think we spend way too much time on the horse race, and I call it horse racism, and I just think we waste way too much time worrying about who's ahead and who's up and who's down, and not thinking about some of the issues. I'm going to do a quick, until one of you tells me time's up, I'm going to spend just the last couple of minutes throwing out a couple of questions on you, and you got to be brief. You got to either duck or say yes or no. And online voting, Mr. Schreiner.
Too vulnerable.
When the technology is ready, then I think that we should be looking at it.
The PCs are doing it right now for our leadership convention, and I think it's very exciting.
When it's secure. Sorry.
But by doing that, though, only 50% are there. That's the issue. So by not voting, they've already decided. They've made their decision.
This is a good issue. This is worth another hour in itself. Let me quickly ask you, though, mandatory voting, Mr. Schreiner. You get in Australia, you get fined $20 if you don't vote. By the way, in Ontario, you get fined if you don't fasten your seatbelt or serve on a jury or get your vaccinations. But Mr. Schreiner.
I don't think we need top-down rules that say you have to vote. Let's give people an incentive to vote. Okay. I think one of the incentives to vote is that your vote counts, which is why I would support electoral reform.
I'm going to fine you because it was a one-word answer.
Oh, okay.
So, Ms. Mandatory voting.
I'd say inspiration, not punishment.
Good. Okay, Mr. Fedeli.
It's best served with a willing partner.
Okay.
I agree.
I wanted to thank the leaders for coming here today. This has never been done before. And I think it's just been a fascinating learning experience for me, and I really appreciate it, and I think our audience has found this really educational as well. So thank you.